It was a cold Friday evening in downtown Chicago. The city lights sparkled through the tall glass windows of one of the most expensive restaurants in the area, a place where only the rich and important people dined. The soft music of a violin played in the background, and the waiters walked gracefully between tables, serving dishes that looked more like art than food. Everything inside the restaurant was fancy, from the white tablecloths to the golden chandeliers. Hanging above in the corner of the restaurant at a table that was always reserved sat Gregory Langston. He was a man everyone in the city knew. A millionaire with a sharp tongue and a love for classical music. He owned several companies and lived in a giant mansion not far from the restaurant. Gregory wore a gray suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. His watch sparkled in the light, and his hair was perfectly styled. He looked like someone who had never faced a problem in his life. Gregory often came to this restaurant, not just for the food but also for the attention. The staff treated him like royalty. The manager always greeted him personally, and the chef made sure his meal was perfect. Gregory liked being admired. He liked being in control. He liked when people listened to him and agreed with him, even when he was being rude. That evening, as he sipped his wine, he looked around the room, clearly bored. He had no company with him, no business partners, and no guests. He had eaten half his steak, but something else caught his attention. A waitress walked past his table. She wasn't like the others. While the other waiters were cheerful and full of energy, this one looked quiet and focused. She didn't make eye contact with the guests, and her smile seemed small and unsure. Her name tag said Emily. Gregory noticed her hands. They were long and slim, and they moved with a kind of grace that was hard to miss. There was something different about her. Emily Carter had been working at the restaurant for only a few months. She always tried her best to stay unnoticed, to just do her job quietly and go home. She needed the money, and this job paid better than the last few she had. But the job wasn't easy. Carrying heavy trays, smiling when she was tired, and dealing with rude customers was exhausting. She didn't complain, though. She had learned to survive. She didn't expect kindness from strangers, and she certainly didn't expect anything magical to happen in a place like this. But Gregory kept watching her. He called her over when his glass was half full and asked for more water, even though he didn't really need it. Emily came over, nodded, and poured the water without saying much. Her hands moved carefully. That's when Gregory spoke, half joking and half mocking. "You have pianist fingers," he said with a raised eyebrow. "Ever play?" Emily paused for a second, not sure if he was making fun of her. She gave a nervous laugh and replied softly, "I used to." Gregory leaned back in his chair, interested now. "Used to?" he asked. "Why'd you stop?" Emily didn't want to talk about it. She simply said life happened and gave a polite smile before walking away quickly. Gregory didn't stop watching her. Back in the kitchen area, Emily tried to calm herself. That small question had stirred up memories she had pushed away for years. Memories of a time when she was on stage, playing piano pieces with her whole heart. She remembered the feel of the keys under her fingers, the sound of applause, and the dreams she once had. But those days felt like a different life now. Gregory, however, was not done thinking about her. He tapped his finger on the table, lost, in thought. He loved music. He had met famous pianists and donated money to music schools. But he had never seen a waitress like her before, one who had the hands of an artist. He wondered what kind of music she could play. Was she really good? Or just one of those people who learned for a few months and quit? The more he thought about it, the more curious he became. He wasn't used to not knowing things. He was the kind of man who always got what he wanted. If he was curious about something, he would find the answer even if it meant making someone uncomfortable. For the rest of the meal, he kept watching Emily. She tried to avoid him, taking care of other tables, but she could feel his eyes following her. It made her nervous, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't afford to lose the job. As Gregory finished his dessert, he thought of something. A small idea formed in his mind. It started as a joke, but the more he thought about it, the more it entertained him. He decided that next time he came to the restaurant, he would challenge her. Not to be mean, but to amuse himself. What harm could it do? If she was good, he would be impressed. If not, it would still be entertaining. Emily had no idea that a simple passing comment she made would change the course of her life. That one sentence "I used to" was about to unlock a door she thought was forever closed. And the person who held the key was a rich, bored man who had no idea how powerful her talent really was. That night, when she went home, Emily sat on her small couch in her one-bedroom apartment. She didn't have a piano anymore. The one she used to have was sold years ago. The sound of the music still lived in her head. She could still hear it, still feel it in her bones. She thought about the strange man who noticed her hands. She wondered what made him ask. And for the first time in a long while, she missed playing. On the other side of the city, Gregory sat in his mansion, drinking another glass of wine. Still thinking about the quiet waitress with the pianist hands, he smiled to himself. "Next week," he said out loud. "Next week? Let's see what you've got." Neither of them knew that destiny had just knocked quietly, softly, like the first note of a beautiful song waiting to be played. A week passed, and the weather in Chicago stayed cold, with soft snow falling over the streets. Inside the restaurant, things were as usual, busy, elegant, and full of wealthy guests. The staff moved quickly, but quietly, making sure every table was served with care. Among them was Emily Carter, wearing her black and white uniform, her hair tied back, and a tired look on her face. She had worked extra hours this week, and her feet ached. But like always, she kept her head down and focused. On her job, she didn't want attention. She just wanted peace. But peace was not what she was going to get that night. Gregory Langston returned. This time with a strange energy about him. He walked in wearing a thick dark coat and gloves made of fine leather. As soon as he entered, the manager rushed to greet him like always. Gregory nodded, but he wasn't paying much attention. He scanned the restaurant like he was looking for something or someone. When he saw Emily moving between tables, placing plates carefully, he smiled. There she was, just as quiet and graceful as before. Tonight, he had a plan. He sat at his usual table, and the staff served him quickly. Everyone knew that Mr. Langston didn't like waiting. He ordered his favorite wine and a 3-course meal, but his mind wasn't on the food. He kept glancing at Emily every few minutes. She hadn't seen him yet, and that made things easier. For him, halfway through the evening, the restaurant was full. Rich couples laughed over wine. Businessmen talked in low voices. Soft piano music played in the background from the speakers. Everything felt like a normal, elegant evening until Gregory stood up. He tapped his spoon on his wine glass loudly. The clinking sound cut through the chatter in the room. People stopped talking. Forks paused in midair. All eyes turned to the man in the gray suit, standing at his table with a proud smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory said loudly, his voice rich and confident, "I have a surprise for you tonight." The crowd looked at each other in confusion. Some smiled, thinking it was one of those playful moments that rich people did for fun. Others looked curious. Emily, standing at the far end of the restaurant, froze when she heard his voice. Something about the way he spoke made her stomach twist. She slowly turned and saw Gregory looking directly at her. She felt her heart start to race. "This fine establishment," Gregory continued, "has many things to be proud of. Excellent food, great service. And as I recently discovered, hidden talent." The crowd chuckled politely. Gregory pointed toward Emily and said, "This young lady here, Emily, is more than just a waitress. She's a pianist." Emily's face turned red. Her hands began to tremble. People were looking at her now. She shook her head slightly, hoping Gregory would stop, but he didn't. "Last week, he said she told me she used to play. I don't believe in letting talent go to waste. So tonight I challenge her to play something for us." Some people clapped softly, thinking it was part of the restaurant's entertainment. Others looked confused. Emily stood frozen, unsure. What to do? Gregory smiled at her and said, "One song. That's all. I'll even pay you $1,000 for it. What do you say?" The room went silent. Everyone looked at Emily. A few whispered things like, What's she going to do? Can she even play? Emily's throat went dry. $1,000 was a lot of money. She needed it. Rent was due, bills were piling up. But the piano? She hadn't touched one in years. And playing in front of this crowd, her hands felt heavy just thinking about it. The manager came over and whispered, "It's your choice." Pressure. But she knew there was pressure. She could feel it in the air. Gregory pulled out a bundle of cash from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "Right here? Just one song?" The sight of the money made Emily take a deep breath. Her heart was thumping hard. She slowly walked forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The room watched her as if something magical or disastrous was about to happen. At the corner of the restaurant stood a grand piano. It was mostly there for decoration. Sometimes a hired musician played soft music on weekends, but it was unused that night. Emily stood in front of it. Her hands hovered above the keys. She hadn't played in so long. Could she still do it? Would her fingers remember? She sat down. The seat felt cold. Her fingers shook as they touched the keys. The whispers behind her didn't help. Someone laughed softly. Someone said, "This is going to be awkward." She closed her eyes. In her mind, she tried to hear the music she used to love. And then, slowly, her fingers began to move. At first, the sound was soft, almost unsure, a few wrong notes, a few uneven moments. But then something shifted. Her hands began to find the rhythm. Her body leaned forward. Her mind shut out the crowd. The music started to flow. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, piece she had loved since she was a teenager. The melody was gentle, sad, and beautiful. And it came from deep inside her, not just from her memory, but from her soul. The crowd stopped moving. Even the servers paused to listen. The sound of the piano wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. It was full of emotion, full of beauty, and full of power. Gregory sat down slowly, eyes wide. This was not what he expected. He had hoped for a cute moment, maybe something funny. But what he got was real talent, pure and honest. Emily forgot where she was. Her fingers danced on the keys. The notes told a story of dreams lost and pain buried, of love and struggle. The room was completely silent, except for the music. When the final note played, she lifted her hands gently and placed them in her lap. There was a moment of silence, then a loud burst of applause. People stood up from their tables. Some were clapping hard. Others had tears in their eyes. Emily looked shocked. She stood up, unsure what to do. The manager walked over and gave her a hug. One of the guests called out, "Encore." Gregory looked stunned. He slowly picked up the cash he had placed on the table and walked over to her. He handed it to her and said quietly, "I was wrong to joke. That was beyond anything I imagined." Emily took the money, her hand still shaking. She gave a small nod but said nothing. People began to ask her questions. "Where did you learn? Why aren't you performing? Do you teach?" She felt overwhelmed. She wasn't ready for attention. She wasn't ready for the past to come rushing back, but it had already happened. She returned to the kitchen, where some of the staff hugged her. Others just stared at her in disbelief. She had always been the quiet one, the one no one noticed. But tonight, she had become the star. Later that night, as the restaurant closed and the guests left, Gregory stood outside in the snow, looking up at the sky. His face had changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked thoughtful, maybe even ashamed. Inside, Emily sat alone at the piano, playing one soft tune after another, not for the crowd, not for the money, but for herself, for the part of her that she had hidden for too long, for the dreams she thought were dead, for the music that had waited in silence patiently until it was finally allowed to breathe again. As the last bit of applause faded from the restaurant, the sound of Emily's music still floated softly in the air, as if the notes refused to leave. The grand piano, which had sat silently for so many nights, had finally come alive in it. Had done so through the hands of a woman most people had never even noticed before. The faces in the room had changed. No longer did anyone look at Emily as just another server carrying drinks and smiling politely. They now looked at her with surprise, admiration, and curiosity. Emily sat at the piano bench, breathing deeply. Her heart was still racing, and her fingers tingled from the rush of emotion and nervousness. She stared at the keys in front of her. The same keys she had once loved more than anything else in the world. They had been her escape, her joy, her peace. And for the first time in many years, she had felt that same joy again. But even more shocking than the audience's reaction was what had happened inside her. She hadn't just played the piece. She had felt it every single note. She had lost herself in it like she used to. Her mind had stopped worrying about rent, tired feet, long shifts, and the sadness she carried inside. For those few minutes, it was just her and the music. As she stood up from the piano, the crowd stood again and clapped louder. People at their tables whispered excitedly. "Did you hear how she played that last part? I've been to concerts that didn't sound that good. Where did she come from?" One woman near the back, who worked as a music teacher, wiped tears from her eyes and whispered to her husband, "She doesn't belong here. She belongs on a stage." Lee gave a soft, shy smile and bowed her head slightly. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Most of her life recently had been about staying invisible, surviving quietly, and holding back the parts of herself that once dreamed big. Gregory Langston, who had been the reason for this entire scene, sat frozen at his table. For once, he had nothing to say. He had started the evening expecting a bit of amusement, a waitress fumbling on the piano, be playing Twinkle Twinkle or something simple. He thought it would be funny, even charming. But what he had witnessed was something completely different. It wasn't just talent, it was brilliance. He had heard live performances from world-famous pianists in concert halls across the world. But Emily's playing was different. It had something special, deep emotion, a raw, honest beauty. She didn't just play the notes, she told a story with them. And for the first time in a long time, Gregory Langston felt small. He stood up. Slowly, not clapping but watching. He walked toward the piano, where Emily stood, still trying to understand what had just happened. He reached into his coat and pulled out the bundle of money he had offered her as a joke. He held it out to her, but his voice was different, now quieter, respectful. "You earned this," he said, handing it to her, "and I was wrong. That was breathtaking." "Ah." Emily hesitated for a moment before taking the money. She gave a small nod and whispered, "Thank you." Gregory didn't know what else to say. He turned and walked back to his table, but he didn't sit. He gathered his coat and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind his half-eaten dessert and the crowd still buzzing with excitement. Inside, the atmosphere had completely changed. The mood had gone from elegant and formal to emotional and alive. The other servers gathered around Emily and congratulated her. Some gave her high fives. Others just stared like they couldn't believe what they had witnessed. One of the kitchen staff said, "Emily, where were you hiding that all this time?" She just smiled shyly, unsure how to explain the years she had buried her passion under heavy responsibilities. It wasn't something you could explain in a few words. The restaurant manager, Mr. Dalton, came over to her and said, "Emily, I think it's time we added live piano to our weekend experience. And I know exactly who should play." Emily laughed a little, her cheeks red. "Let me think about it." That night, after her shift ended, she walked home in the cold night air. The city lights blurred behind the soft snow. The bundle of money was safely tucked into her coat pocket, but she hardly thought about it. All she could think about was the feeling she had when she was playing. Her tiny apartment felt warmer than usual when she entered. She sat down, not on the couch this time, but on the edge of her bed. She closed her eyes and replayed the moment in her mind, her hands on the keys. The sound of the notes, the silence of the room, and the explosion of applause afterward. A part of her had come back to life. The next morning, things started to change faster than she expected. One of the guests who had been there at the restaurant was a popular local blogger. She had filmed part of Emily's performance and posted it online with the caption, "Waitress turns out to be genius pianist. You won't believe your ears." The video spread quickly. People began sharing it on social media. Within hours, it had thousands of views. By the next day, it was trending. Comments flooded in. Who is she? Why is she working as a waitress? She's better than half the performers at the music hall. By Sunday, local news reporters started calling the restaurant. They wanted to interview Emily. They wanted to know her story. Some even offered to bring cameras to the restaurant to record her playing again. Emily was shocked. She had never expected this kind of reaction. She was happy to be noticed. Yes, but also scared. All this attention felt strange. What if it all disappeared tomorrow? What if people only liked the video but didn't care about her story? But deep inside, something was changing. A small flame that had almost gone out was starting to burn again. One evening, she received a phone call from a woman named Rachel Mills. Rachel was the director of a local arts foundation. She had seen the video and wanted to invite Emily to perform at a fundraiser gala the following month. It was a formal event, attended by people who loved the arts and often donated to music schools and young artists. Rachel said, "We would be honored to have you play. No pressure, just one piece." Emily thought about it. Her heart said yes, but her mind was full of doubts. Still, she agreed. That night, she borrowed a keyboard from a friend who taught music. She started practicing again late at night after work, her fingers slowly remembering everything they had once known. She started with simple pieces, then moved to more complex ones. Her confidence grew with every note. Meanwhile, Gregory Langston kept thinking about her. He told no one about the night, but inside he felt something strange. He had made fun of her. He had used money and power to make her perform, expecting nothing special. But she had proved him wrong in the most beautiful way. He looked her up and saw the video going viral. He saw the comments, the interviews, and for once, instead of feeling proud of himself, he felt something else: regret. He had embarrassed her in front of strangers, even if the outcome was good. That thought stayed with him. So a few days later, Gregory returned to the restaurant, but not to eat. He asked to speak to Emily. She came out from the kitchen, surprised. To see him again, he looked uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I didn't mean to treat you like entertainment. I didn't expect to be moved the way I was. You're incredible, and I'd like to help." Emily didn't speak right away. She looked at him, searching for any sign that he was playing another game, but his eyes were serious. "How?" she asked simply. "I know people," he said. "Concert organizers? Sponsors? People who could help you restart what you once had?" Emily paused. Then she asked, "Why?" Gregory smiled a little. "Because for the first time in a long time, I saw something real, and I'd like to be part of helping that grow." She didn't agree right away, but she said, "I'll think about it." She did. Not because she needed him, but because maybe, just maybe, he was trying to change too. As the days passed, more opportunities came. Her video reached 1 million views. Music schools sent her messages. She was invited to play at small concerts, local halls, and charity events. Each time, she played with her whole heart. And each time, people listened in silence, then clapped like they were witnessing something rare. Emily Carter was no longer just a name tag on a waitress uniform. She was a pianist, a storyteller, a reminder that sometimes talent lives quietly, waiting for someone not to discover it, but to believe in it again. And that belief had started with a challenge that was meant to embarrass her, but instead awakened a gift the world had nearly forgotten. Emily's life had changed almost overnight. One simple performance, meant as a joke by a rich man, had opened a door she thought was locked forever. The internet had seen her, heard her, and loved her. But with every rising story, there's always a past, and Emily's past wasn't something she could easily ignore or forget. As the days passed, more people began to ask questions about her. Local reporters started visiting the restaurant. Guests recognized her face, and some even asked for photos. Her coworkers treated her differently now, with a mix of respect and curiosity. People whispered when she walked by. Everyone wanted to know who she really was. Why would someone with so much talent be working in a restaurant, cleaning tables, and carrying dishes? The answer was simple, but also painful. One evening, after a long shift, Emily returned to her small apartment. She sat by the window, the city lights blinking outside. Her hands were sore, not from playing piano, but from serving customers all day. She thought about how far she had come in just a few weeks. But her heart also felt heavy, because now that her name was out there, so was her story. A few days later, a young journalist named Clara Simmons requested an interview. She said it would be a feature article not just about the performance, but about the real Emily. At first, Emily was unsure. She didn't like talking about her past, but something told her it was time. She agreed. The interview was done at a quiet coffee shop. Clara brought a small recorder and a notebook. She asked simple questions at first about Emily's love for piano, her favorite pieces, how it felt to play again. Emily answered with soft smiles and short words. But then the harder questions came. Why did you stop playing? Clara asked gently. Emily paused. She looked down at her hands and took a breath. My mother got sick, she said. Everything changed. Clara listened carefully. Emily continued. I was 17 when I got into Juilliard. It was a dream. My piano teacher cried when I got the letter. I thought everything was going to change for the better. Just a few months later, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. Stage 4. I was her only family. I couldn't leave her. She wiped a tear before it could fall. I tried to juggle both school and home, but it didn't work. I missed classes, fell behind. Eventually, I left school, sold the piano, sold everything, took care of her full time until she passed away. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she asked, Did you ever play after that? Emily shook her head. I couldn't. Every time I sat at a piano, it reminded me of what I had lost. The story touched Clara deeply. The next week, the article was published. It was titled, The Hidden Melody, How a Waitress Gave Up Juilliard to Care for Her Mother. The story went viral again. But this time it wasn't just about talent. It was about love, sacrifice, and strength. People all over the country shared it. Emily received thousands of messages from strangers, thanking her for her honesty. Had lost their own dreams. Others had taken care of sick loved ones. Emily's story became more than just about music. It became about hope. One message stood out. It was from a retired music professor who wrote, The world needs more artists. Like you ones who play from the heart, not from pride. Emily cried when she read it, because for the first time in years, someone had reminded her that her journey mattered. Meanwhile, Gregory Langston also read the article. He sat in his office, the newspaper open in front of him. The man who once forced a waitress to play for. Fun now saw the full truth. It hit him hard. He realized that his little joke had accidentally reopened a wound Emily had spent years trying to heal. But instead of hurting her, it had done something unexpected. It had brought her back to life. Gregory felt a strange mix of guilt and admiration. For days he thought about what he could do to make things right. Yes, he had apologized, had offered help, but that wasn't enough, not for someone who had given up everything for love and still chose kindness. So, he decided to do something more meaningful. He contacted a close friend, Becca Lynn, the director of a national music foundation. Gregory asked if she could consider Emily for a special grant. The foundation supported artists who had paused their careers due to personal hardship. Rebecca agreed to meet Emily. Emily was nervous about the meeting. She wore her best dress, though it was a little old. When she arrived at the foundation office, she saw polished floors, framed posters of famous musicians, and rooms full of instruments. Rebecca greeted her warmly. I've heard your music. It's not just good. Real. They talked for over an hour. Rebecca asked about Emily's past, her dreams, and her plans. Emily answered honestly. She said she wanted to keep playing, maybe teach. Yes. Maybe even perform more if people wanted to hear her. 2 weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. She had been awarded the grant. It included a new piano, practice space, and 6 months. A financial support to focus only on music. She held the letter in her hands and cried. Not because of the money, but because someone believed in her enough to give her a second chance. The piano arrived at her apartment. Beautiful, black and shiny, with perfect ivory keys. When she touched it for the first time, it felt like touching a part of herself that had been missing for years. Every evening, she played for hours. Chopin, Debussy, Mozart. Then her own pieces. She started writing again, creating music from her own story notes filled with love, loss, and quiet strength. People began to notice. She was invited to perform at small concerts, charity events, and even local schools. At one school, a little girl asked her, "Did you ever feel like giving up?" Emily smiled and said, "Yes, but sometimes life gives you a second chance." When you least expect it, the little girl hugged her. One evening, after a concert at a community center, Emily stepped outside to find Gregory waiting by the door. He wore a simple coat this time, not his usual expensive suits. "I saw the performance," he said. "You were incredible." "Thank you," Emily replied. He paused. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to humiliate you that night." "Didn't know your story? I didn't know your pain. I wish I had treated you better." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "If that night hadn't happened, I might never have played again." Sometimes even mistakes bring blessings. Gregory nodded. "If you ever need support, or a stage or anything, I'm here." Emily smiled. "I think I've found my own stage now." That night, as she walked home, she thought about everything that had happened. All the pain, the hard choices, the long years of silence. And now, all the beauty that had come from that silence. Her music had returned. Not as a career, not as a job, but as a part of who she was. This time she wasn't going to let it go. Emily Carter was no longer just the girl who played a surprise song in a restaurant. She was the woman who gave up everything for Louvond, found her way back to the music that had waited patiently inside her all along. And though she had lived quietly for so long, her story was now being heard. Louder than ever, through every note she played. The day of the big concert arrived. It was the first time Emily was going to perform in a proper music hall since she had left her dream behind years ago. This time, she was not a student, not a girl from a music school. She was a woman who had lived through pain, sacrifice, and silence. And now, it's quitting. She was ready to let her music speak again, but on her own terms. The concert was being held at the prestigious Harmony Theater, a grand hall known for hosting famous pianists and orchestras. The place was almost full. People who had seen her viral video, read her interviews, and followed her story online were now sitting in the audience waiting to hear her live. Some came out of curiosity, some out of admiration, and some simply because they had been touched by her journey. Backstage, Emily sat alone in a small dressing room. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. Her hands were calm, but her heart was full of emotion. On the table next to her was a small photo of her mother. She had placed it there to remind herself why she was here, why she had started this journey in the first place. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Memories rushed into her mind: her first piano lesson, her mother cheering. At her school recital, the letter from Juilliard, the hospital visits, the day she sold her piano, and the first time she touched keys again at the restaurant. All those moments had brought her here. Then someone knocked gently on the door. "5 minutes," said a voice. Emily nodded and stood up. She picked up the photo and smiled at it. "Tonight's for you, Mom," she whispered. When she stepped out onto the stage, the lights were bright, and the audience went silent. No one clapped yet. They just watched as she walked slowly to the grand piano sitting in the middle of the stage. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and took one last deep breath. Then she began to play. The first piece was soft, an emotional Chopin again. The same nocturne she had played at the restaurant, but this time fuller, deeper, more powerful. It was no longer a song of surprise or fear. It was a song of return. Her fingers moved gently but confidently across the keys, filling the hall with a melody that made people close their eyes and hold their breath. Every note told a story. Not just about music, but about life, about how dreams can be broken and still find their way back. People in the audience wiped their eyes. Others sat frozen, unable to move. Music had the power to reach the deepest part of the human heart. After, The first piece ended. The room stayed quiet for a second. Then the applause broke out, strong and loud. People stood up, cheering, whistling, clapping with all their strength. But Emily didn't smile. She simply nodded and prepared for her second piece. This time she played one of her own compositions. It was the first time she had shared something she had written. The piece started slow, like the beginning of a storm. Then it grew louder and faster, like someone running toward something they had lost. And finally, it ended with soft, sweet notes. It's like someone finding peace after a long journey. This original piece was the heart of the night. When it ended, the audience stood again, even louder than before. Some shouted her name, others waved, and clapped nonstop. Emily looked out at the crowd and felt something she hadn't felt in years, pride not in her talent, but in her journey. In the front row, she saw familiar faces. Her old piano teacher, now retired, was crying and clapping. Gregory Langston was there too, dressed simply, standing quietly, watching with a humble smile. He had kept his promise not just to support her but to step back and let her shine. He had helped open the door, but she had walked through it on her own. After the concert, there was a small gathering backstage. Many people came to greet her musicians. Organizers, journalists, fans. They all praised her performance and told her how much her story had inspired them. Emily thanked everyone kindly, but she didn't let it get to her head. She knew fame could fade. What mattered was the music and the truth behind it. Later, when the crowd had left and the hall was empty, Emily walked back onto the stage alone. She sat at the piano one more time, not to perform, but just to feel the keys beneath her fingers again. She played a simple lullaby, one her mother used to hum when she was a child. It wasn't perfect or fancy, but it was hers. As she played, she thought about how life had tested her. There were times when she had nothing, no money, no piano, no dream. But even in those darkest moments, a small part of her had never given up. And that small part had survived, waiting quietly for the day it could live again. Now it had. In the weeks that followed, offers began pouring in. Invitations to perform at concerts in other cities, requests from music schools for master classes, interviews from national television networks. Emily chose carefully. She didn't want to become a product or a celebrity. She just wanted to share her music with people who truly listened. She also started teaching. She began a small program for children from poor backgrounds, kids who had talent but no money for music lessons. She bought secondhand keyboards, taught them in community centers, and shared not only her knowledge, but also her story. She told them, "You don't have to be rich to make music. You just have to love it." Her little program grew quickly. Donations came in. Volunteers joined. Soon, it became a non-profit foundation called Second Notes, named after the idea that everyone deserves a second chance to sing their song. One day, during a school visit, a young girl raised her hand and asked, "Miss Emily, do you ever wish your life had been different?" Emily smiled and replied, "Sometimes, but if my life had been different, I might not be here with you. And I wouldn't trade this moment for anything." The girl nodded, then hugged her. Gregory Langston stayed in touch. He never asked for attention or thanks. He simply supported quietly, sometimes sending funding for instruments, sometimes connecting her to people who could help. He had changed too. Seeing Emily rise had opened his heart. It made him see how much he had once missed by chasing only money and status. He told her once, "I used to think power came from wealth, but now I know it comes from truth, and you have it." Years passed, but Emily never stopped playing. Her music changed with time. It became richer, wiser, deeper. But it always carried the same soul. Audiences came to listen not just to her fingers, but to her story. She never forgot the restaurant, the challenge, or the moment she sat at that grand piano, unsure if she still had it in her. That moment had become the turning point of her life, a moment born out of someone else's arrogance, but transformed into her rebirth. And she never forgot her mother, the woman who taught her kindness, who believed in her music, who gave up everything so her daughter could dream. Emily played for her every time. In her heart, her mother was always in the front row, smiling proudly. Emily Carter had once been a forgotten dream, hidden behind a waitress apron and tired eyes. But now she was a voice, a melody, a light. She was proof that even when the world turns away from you, even when your path is broken and your song goes silent, there is still hope. There is still music waiting to be played. And sometimes the most beautiful songs come from the quietest hearts.